Let's start by creating the necessary directories for this role. Check how it looks, and then open main.yml inside tasks subdirectory. First, we'll make sure that there is a directory named services in root's home directory, and then we'll copy the Traefik subdirectory to that location. After that, we'll create a Docker network named web, and all containers that are part of this setup will also be a part of this network. That way, if you ever want to run some containers for testing purposes, meaning in addition to these quote-unquote main ones, you can run them outside of this network in isolation. Next, we make sure that this file called acme.json exists inside the Traefik directory. This file is where Traefik keeps information about TLS certificates it will retrieve from Let's Encrypt. And finally, we'll run Traefik with the help of Docker Compose. Save the file and then open dockercompose.yml inside Traefik subdirectory. This looks intimidating, so let's cover it step by step. Note that, as in Bash, these are variables and we'll define them in a separate file. At the top level of Docker Compose YML file, you have services. We only have one service here, and that's Traefik. Here I'm setting the container name, otherwise it will get a random name assigned by the Docker engine. I'm setting the host name, the Docker image and image tag I want to use, and to restart the container unless explicitly stopped. This command is what I'm passing to the Traefik binary. If I was starting Traefik from the command line, these would be the arguments I started with. You can check the documentation about the details, but these are the important ones. I want to enable the dashboard. I'm setting up HTTP and HTTPS entry points. I'm enabling Docker and file providers, and I'm setting up automatic certificates with the help of Let's Encrypt. This ports section here is Docker Compose version of -p in Docker run. I'm mapping both port 80 and port 443 from the host to those same ports inside the container. As for volumes, I'm adding the Docker socket so that Traefik can talk with the Docker engine and monitor for container labels. This is the file where Traefik will store TLS certificates, and this is where we'll store configs used by the file provider. This container will be a part of the Docker's web network. Then I'm adding some parameters for logging, and then I'm setting up labels. I'll explain these in more detail after we deploy Traefik, because it will be easier to show it to you in the Traefik's dashboard, but basically what I'm doing is this. I'm setting up a router that will match a certain host name, then I'm redirecting HTTP to HTTPS, I'm setting up Let's Encrypt as TLS certificate resolver, then I'm instructing Traefik where to find the dashboard. That's this API at internal thing. And finally, I'm setting up IP whitelist and basic auth. Lastly, you have to have this network section in dockercompose.yml, which in our case looks like this. Save the file and now open the .env file to define all the variables. We have a container name and then hostname. Speaking of hostname, we need to set a DNS A record for traefik.do-p.com to point to the public IP of the VPS. In Linode console, add an A record. Hostname is traefik.do-p.com. IP address is the public IP of your VPS. Set TTL and click Save. We then set Docker image and image tag. We set up Traefik dashboard credentials. Note that password needs to be hashed, and in order to get it in that format, you use this command here. We set up service. This is how Traefik will address this particular service internally. We set up mail, which we'll use to receive information from Let's Encrypt. And finally, an IP whitelist. This means that only those coming from this subnet, in other words, those with WireGuard set up, will be able to access the Traefik dashboard. Let's save this file, open setup.yml, comment out all previous roles, and add Traefik role, save this file, and run Ansible playbook. Ansible has finished, and if I go to the VPS and check the output of the docker ps command, I will see that the container is running, that the ports are mapped, and the container name is traefik.do-p.com, which we've set up through the Docker Compose with the help of a variable. In my web browser, I can now go to the https traefik.do-p.com, provide the credentials, and I will see Traefik dashboard. If you get a notification about TLS certificate, it probably means that your DNS is still not propagated fully, so getting a certificate through Let's Encrypt failed. Give it a few more minutes, then restart Traefik either by navigating to the services Traefik directory on the VPS and doing Docker Compose down and then up again, or by simply running the Ansible again. So what happened just now? Let's click here on HTTP and go step by step. After typing in the URL, domain was resolved to the public IP address. My request reached the public interface of the VPS on port 443, which is mapped to the 443 of the Traefik container, and we reached a Traefik router for this host because the request had that host in its HTTP headers. Let's click on this rule and see what happens when a request comes in with host traefik.do-p.com in its headers. It first hits the router traefik@docker and then these two middlewares. First, the IP whitelist, which I passed because I am connected with WireGuard, and then basic auth. Then, after a successful login, we hit this service, which will tell Traefik where is the final destination for this request, which in case of the dashboard is the Traefik's internal API. In case that was confusing, here's an image from the Traefik documentation. So there is a request with the desired host in its headers. In our case, that was traefik.do-p.com. You hit an entry point, that is HTTP or HTTPS. Note that we have a redirect in case you hit port 80 first. Then there is a matching router for that host. If there are middlewares, you must go through all of them, and then you hit a service, which tells Traefik where the actual service is listening. If I disconnect from the WireGuard and refresh the page, it won't work anymore, because we can't pass through the IP whitelist middleware. We are no longer coming from the defined subnet, but from some public IP address.